Yeah.
You read it. Go.
The first-time buyer copped it harder than this first-time buyer. Is that true? Stay tuned.
So mum and dad always talk about how hard it is for their child, whether it's Billy, whether it's Michael, whether it's Stephen, whoever that child is, and they always talk about how much harder it is these days. And we wanted to look at the information and give you the facts of, is it easier? By how much? Is it harder? By how much? And we've got a great story given to us by Macro Business that we've done today for you.
It's not all in your head. I think parents and kids, very much overthink this in their head, and they say, back in my day, well, we've got the facts and the figures to argue all of this as of this morning.
It's there. It's true. And you know what? I guess, look, it is potentially easier, harder. What do you do to get around it? I guess is the thing we've got to all work out together. We're all in it together. But something to look at very interesting that I found today was the peak ownership in Australia. It's become less trendy to own a property. More so the fact that we're almost gone back to 1950s without property ownership. That's the amount of people that actually own a property in their lifetime in Australia, outright or with a mortgage.
Yeah. So, as the big red words say, it peaked in 1966, well before my time. But Mark, I suppose you weren't even kind of operating in back then, were you? You're not that old.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. It's no, I wasn't even in a womb. I was not there. But it's interesting. It became pretty goddamn trendy in 1968. In 1966. There it is.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool to own a property.
And then it took a bit of a rapid, sharp downhill spike from there. So, like all markets, it's ups and downs, but it's always been, I think, the Australian dream to own a property, and particularly, we'll get there in a second, but to own your property outright, no mortgage, is like the all Australian dream. So, even that's becoming harder and harder.
Absolutely. Now, next thing for us to study.
Next graph. Home own outright. It is slowly gone down and down and down. So over the last almost 3 decades now, we're down 10%. And I think this is got to be related to prices as well.
It's pretty big. And I think when you're talking 40% to 30%, that's a swing of almost 25% of people that were owning a property outright that swung. So, a quarter of the people that are having a mortgage are actually never going to pay it off, more than 20 years ago. So that has definitely changed.
Yeah, what do you reckon that's, what could you bring that back to outside of prices?
I think affordability. It seems like that's the way life is, that people are just happy to rent it than to own it. Even when you relate that back to a mortgage, they're happy to have that over their head forever people are happy to have stuff over their head more than ever. So before you had to buy the car, before you had to buy the phone outright, before you had to own the property, it was the Australian dream. Whereas now it's, you know, the photocopier, you had to own it. Whereas that whole leasehold or having that constant debt over your head sort of these days is a lot more normal, a lot more acceptable.
More comfortable, maybe. I think it's people, you know, people can service that.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
But this is where it gets interesting. Age of Australian first home buyer nationally, and it does mention there. Please note the figure of 2022 is the year to date, so that they'll be in for an update soon. But yeah, this is interesting. So started, you know, around sort of 25, 24, and again slowly crept up. So I think it's now in its mid-30s is scary, really scary.
Yeah, so and I think you're a good example, Billy. And you should be pretty proud of buying a property so young, and saving and working hard and getting in there. But you can see that you were really against the grain at buying something at 18. That typically 34 is the average age of the first home buyer getting into a property these days. I find that amazing. I find that just amazing.
Yeah, I do as well. I do as well. I think we spoke about it yesterday. Northern Beaches, there's definitely a bit of a bubble. Again, I think there's incentives there from parents really trying to help kids get into the market. I think the Beaches is definitely one of the trickiest. It's, you know, no doubt one of the most expensive. But 34 is, you know, it's really old. And when you consider what a property value does over 10 years, in our core area, it's almost doubling. You know, has a long impact into someone's, you know, sort of life. You know, it's almost.
It just, when you use the connotation, when you're saying first home buyer, the thing that comes to my mind is not a 34-year-old, which is now the national average.
Yeah, so true. We've got a few comments here as well. Ownership will go like Europe. People don't get in, need to invest first, then buy the dream home. It's so well said. So many people worry about buying, you know, your perfect forever home. Just start with something that you can actually get yourself into. Build on that.
We all did. I did, you did, we did, we all did.
And I don't think that's ever changed, right? But people's mindsets certainly have.
Now, Billy, this really played on my mind, what's on the screen at the moment. This overnight, this really played on my mind. This messed with my mind.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
I did think to myself, like, this is impossible. How does a first home buyer do this? If they've got to be, if they need a household income of around 140,000, for a typical, can you read that out for us?
Yeah, so a finder.com.au analysis said that purchasers now need household income around $140,000 to afford a typical Australian home. Meanwhile, in Sydney, it would be closer to $250,000 combined.
That's really done my head in. Like, for first home buyer to have that combined income. Now, look, I guess we've just said that the first home buyer average age is 34 now. Fact. I guess when you're 34, combined income, you know, of 140 for somewhere in Australia, sure. 250, each party's on 125 each, and they're trying to have kids. So they're going down to one wage, and it's going to have to be closer to 250 if they're buying a property. That's bloody hard. But something I did think overnight is exactly what was just said from Luke about rent vesting. Just, yeah, you know, you don't have to be in Hero and grab the median price. So this 250K is suggesting the median price in Australia, in Sydney, showing how hard it is. You don't have to do that. You can just get a little one better, rent it out, watch it grow from the age of 20 to 25. Then you can step into a two-bedder, watch it grow, and you can step into your house. So you can actually step into this rather than going the whole hog and going and buying in the median price.
Well, it's almost the wrong way to do it. Keep on waiting, because you can never save as quick as these capital growth are climbing in these major cities. And going back to the difference of buying 10 years earlier, if you have the option, it can be the difference of potentially doubling your money and building the equity into it. So it's massive when you think about the long-term effect of it. The government incentives have fractured the market, high highs and low lows.
Yep.
Interesting. I certainly think those.
This is something that I know we do love overseas migration, but this is not helping, right? If you look at 1900s, the migration we've had into this beautiful country, we are at an historic high period of migration coming into the country. That is going to make it harder for people to rent. That is going to make it harder for people to buy. Make no mistakes, these migrants working hard, buying property, saving hard. It's competition for our first home buyers. I don't mind it, but it's there. Don't think that it's not.
Yeah, and I think that graph there really shows we're getting back to kind of pre-pandemic levels now. If not more. But look, it is there, but it's certainly not going to stop. Population growth 500,000 2022, probably more this year.
That's a monster. But now, last thing, and I'm going to ask for Luke to help me on this one, or you to help me on this one. I couldn't understand this.
Home ownership versus home prices relative to incomes. So your blue line, home ownership rate. Your red line, ratio of average home prices, average annual wages, and then your green is ratio of home prices to median household disposable incomes. Yeah, it's pretty complicated.
It's a bit complicated, but look, a couple of things that I took from it. The annual wages, you can see people are often saying, the average wages, how they're performing over the years since 1950. Like, that's the last 70 years, even 100 years, 110 years. The home ownership rate, there's definitely stress on that when you compare it to a wage. But that's our show.
Luke reckons the bank of mum and dad and inheritance.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess that's the perfect index against migration. So you got new money coming in, old money going out. Who's going to win? I can't help to think the new money coming in, that overseas migration, is always going to be. They're two different animals. One's living off itself, and another one's creating wealth. So I think the one living off itself is always going to do a little bit better.
Yeah, interesting. Will there be a thing of first home buyer in 20 years' time?
Yeah. What's going to swing this, I just don't know. But we wanted today's show just to show people that it's not going on in your mind. It is a real thing. When you look at the facts, the fact is it is harder for a first home buyer. The bank of mum and dad has always stepped in and helped a majority of people, but I think has to step in even more now to help their family. And I think the most key thing I got out of today was reflecting what I did and what you've done, and that's just not worrying about that median property or that perfect home, to get into, but just getting in there and just renting it, just running it as an investment first. You can do that as a first home buyer. You do have to live in it for a short period, very short period, but as a first home buyer, you can take all the incentives. You can rent the property out for the majority of its life, but the beginning of its life, that first 2 months, part of that you have to have to live in it. So it's a good hack.
It's spot on. The incentives have never been better. The reason to get in has never been better, and I can certainly promise you don't need 250,000 to buy a property in Sydney.
As an income.
No way. I reckon half
Absolutely.
and half it again. You don't need that much.
Absolutely. That's a show. It's good news. There's a couple of hacks around what we've got to do. It's real. Show it to mum and dad if you need some help. It's a good story to go, you had it easier than me. You should help me. I can imagine those conversations, but it's that's a show.
Yeah, that's it. We've just given you the grass to strong arm yourself into a great mortgage-free loan from mum and dad. Have a good day, guys.
Have a great day. Thanks, Billy Bob. Everyone have a great day. See you. Bye-bye.